Their corpse, a cocktail, and a name no one dared speak. Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. I am your host, Grant Delaney. Drop a comment. Where are you listening from on tonight's case? Glad to have sharp minds like yours along. Let's dive in. When a man barges into the brownstone unannounced, you can bet 3 things are about to happen. Fritz is going to lose his temper, Wolfe is going to pretend he hasn't noticed, and I'm going to be the poor sap who ends up sorting it out. So when a sharp knock cracked across the front door just after 10 on a Wednesday morning, I was halfway to the vestibule before Wolfe's right eyebrow had finished twitching. He was already settled in his chair, naturally, hands steepled across, his bulk, eyes closed, the Times open on his lap like a burial shroud. I was on page 2 of a fresh case file. Not a case, really. More like a request from a former client's cousin's dentist's widow, and didn't expect excitement of any kind until the next orchid rotation. I opened the door to find a man who looked like a banker on holiday, crisp suit, tan like he'd rented it, and a face creased more from concern than age. He had the kind of expression you get after rereading a confusing telegram 3 times. "Yes?" I asked. "I need to speak with Mr. Nero Wolfe," he said. His voice had the hushed tone of someone used to paneling and proper service. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's urgent and private." That got a fractional grunt from Wolfe inside. I gave the man a slow once-over, he wasn't carrying anything but nerves and expensive cologne, and stepped aside. "Come in, slowly, and if you break anything, we sell tickets." He introduced himself in the front room. Lionel Kent, director of something called the Rosewood Lounge, a private club uptown that I'd only heard of because one of our past clients had threatened to resign from it during a custody spat. Apparently, it was the kind of place that served whiskey behind heavy drapes and kept its scandals in walnut drawers. Wolfe didn't open his eyes when we walked in. He exhaled like a whale, then said, "You are intruding." Mr. Kent didn't flinch. "I wouldn't have come if it weren't, well, essential." "That is what they all say," Wolfe murmured. I stayed on my feet and gestured to the red chair. "Sit, and tell us what's so essential that you've brought your shadow into Mr. Wolfe's very sacred space." Kent sat, but his back was straighter than our coat rack. "There's been a violation. Something was stolen from the lounge." "That is police work," Wolfe said flatly, already drifting toward his next breath. "It's not the theft itself that worries me," Kent said quickly. "It's what the object represents, and who might be implicated by its disappearance." That tickled Wolfe's interest just enough to twitch his eyelid. I could tell because he raised his chin a half-inch, which by Wolfe's standards was a full tap dance. Kent continued. "A small lacquered box, rosewood, 19th century French. It belonged to one of our founding patrons. It wasn't valuable, at least not in the financial sense. But the contents," Wolfe opened his eyes, "were confidential. Letters, personal letters, possibly incriminating." "Possibly?" Wolfe asked, dry as a martini in a drought. Kent hesitated. "The box was under discreet custody in the private annex of the lounge. Only 4 individuals had access to it, and now it's gone." "And you've involved the police?" Wolfe asked. Kent colored slightly. "No, discretion is paramount. If this becomes public, it would be a scandal." I filled in helpfully. "Let me guess. Someone powerful, someone married, and someone with access to a pen and poor. Judgment? Kent managed a tight smile. You're quick. Wolfe let out a breath that rustled the newspaper. Mr. Kent, I have no interest in private clubs, sentimental thefts, or social spasms. But I'm not here on behalf of the club, Kent said, leaning forward. I'm here on behalf of my sister. She's one of the 4 people who had access, and last night she found a letter slipped under her apartment door, a copy of one, of the stolen notes. It's blackmail. Someone is trying to destroy her. Now that at least was a plot twist with some starch in it. Wolfe, who had begun shifting his weight with intent to end the meeting, paused. His eyes stayed on Kent's necktie, purple, paisley, regrettable. And your sister? Kent's voice dropped. Claire Kent. She's an attorney, federal, brilliant, controlled, and she's never confided in me about the box until this morning, when she called me in tears. Wolfe rolled his head back and groaned. Kent pressed. Mr. Wolfe, I can pay your fee, but more than that, I need this handled quietly. My sister's reputation, her career, is on the line. Wolfe's eyes closed again. Pfui. I raised a brow. You're refusing? I'm digesting, Wolfe said. Mr. Kent, leave your contact information with Mr. Goodwin. If I require anything further, he will contact you. You may go. Kent blinked, confused. I stood and motioned toward the door. Wolfe's way of saying he might bite after he's chewed. I'll see you out. After Kent left and I shut the door, I turned back toward the office. You're interested, I said. I'm irritated, Wolfe replied. Same thing with you. He opened his eyes just enough to look at the ceiling. A rosewood box, letters of indiscretion, 4 suspects, and now blackmail. Disgraceful. So we're taking the case? I shall consider it, Wolfe said, after lunch. And that's how it began, with a rosewood box and a nervous clubman, and Wolfe pretending not to care while his mind began to circle like a hawk above a field mouse. I've seen Wolfe turn down murder cases with less disdain than he gave that missing rosewood box. And that's not metaphorical. He once dismissed a client mid-sentence because the man kept calling orchids just flowers. So, when he told me he'd consider Kent's request, I knew something had poked the great man's curiosity harder than he wanted to admit. Still, Wolfe being Wolfe, he didn't say another word about the box, the lounge, or the sister during lunch. Fritz served roast duck with an apricot glaze that should have been framed, not eaten, and we spent the meal in a silence broken only by the clink of cutlery and Wolfe's occasional grunt of approval. I know better than to interrupt gastronomic reverence. After dessert, lemon tart, delicate as scandal, Wolfe finally dabbed his mouth with a napkin and glanced my way. Claire Kent, he said. I put my coffee cup down. You want me to find her? He nodded. Speak to her. Determine if she is rational. Determine if she is worth saving. From blackmail or from herself? From the company she keeps, he said, and from the consequences of what she has done. That was Wolfe's way of saying he believed the lady had secrets. Big ones. I stood, slid my notebook into my pocket and reached for my coat. Do you have an address? Wolfe waved a hand toward the dining room sideboard. Mr. Kent left it for you, along with her office location and her schedule for the day. He is either thorough or desperate. Probably both. Half an hour later, I was downtown, in the kind of office building that screams mid-tier federal power. Clean marble floors, a good security desk, and elevators that sound like they judge your shoes. Claire Kent's name wasn't on any directory, but when I gave her name to the man behind the desk, he picked up a phone and mumbled something, then nodded toward the elevators. 14th floor, room 1443. She's expecting you. That was interesting. Either Wolfe had called without telling me, which would be a first, or Mr. Kent had done a little pre-paving after leaving the brownstone. I took the elevator up and found 1443 behind a frosted glass door with the kind of brass nameplate that doesn't list a name, just initials and a title. Special Counsel, Bureau Division 2B. I knocked. A voice answered. "Come in." Claire Kent stood behind her desk, spine straight, jaw tight, and expression carved out of stone. She had the kind of self-control you usually only see in chess grandmasters and bomb diffusers, but her eyes, pale green, sharp, were scanning me like I'd arrived to audit her soul. "You're Archie Goodwin," she said. "Mr. Wolfe's assistant." I gave her a nod. "Legman, gopher, secretary, social liaison, occasional bodyguard. It's a broad job description." She didn't smile. "Please sit." The office was tidy, minimalist, and extremely alert. No personal photos, no plants, just files, a key, laptop, and a tray with exactly 3 pens. She didn't look like someone who misplaced anything, especially not boxes full of delicate secrets. "I understand your brother spoke to Mr. Wolfe this morning," I said. "And you've been compromised?" Her jaw twitched slightly. "Someone stole the box." "Yes, and now they're trying to destroy me." I waited. She wasn't exactly chatty. She sighed, then reached into her drawer and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a single folded letter. I unfolded it, glanced at the contents, and felt my eyebrows hitch. It was typed, not handwritten. The tone was formal, but the implication wasn't. The letter accused her of having an affair with a married man, one who, if the signature was genuine, happened to be a federal judge. "You didn't write this," I said. "No, but I received the original, handwritten in the box. Months ago I never destroyed it." "Why not?" "Because I didn't know if it would be needed. I'm a lawyer, Mr. Goodwin. Some things are better kept than burned." I studied her. She wasn't lying, not obviously, but she was holding something back, and not just because she was nervous. She was calculating, methodical, the kind of person who checks locks twice before bed. "Tell me about the box," I said, "from the beginning." She nodded. "It was part of a private club tradition. The Rosewood Executive Lounge kept a secure annex by invitation only. 4 of us held keys. Inside was the box. It was symbolic. Anyone could deposit a letter inside, a confession, a memory, a grievance. But once placed, it stayed sealed. It was a vault of discretion. Until it wasn't." "Yes. Who had access?" She exhaled slowly. "Myself. Mr. Langston, he's the chairman. Marcia Verrill, she's an art dealer. And Dr. Edwin Poe, psychologist. He chairs the ethics committee. Friendly bunch. We all signed confidentiality agreements, and it wasn't about blackmail, at least not originally. But someone decided the box was more than a keepsake," I said. "And you think one of the 4 took it?" She nodded once. "Why not go to the police?" "Because it would ruin all of us. The box held letters from people in high places. Not just about infidelity, about finances, personal weaknesses. Some might even border on federal violations. If this goes public, careers crumble, yours included. Yes. Then why come to Wolfe? Because my brother believes Wolfe is a cleaner kind of mind, someone who can sort through this without making it worse. That part was true too. Wolfe was many things, but he wasn't reckless or loud or interested in consequences that didn't concern his orchids or his meal schedule. I stood. Keep your head down. If anything else arrives, letters, threats, weird postcards, call me immediately. I'll speak with the other three. You'll need an introduction. She handed me a small embossed card. It was a Rosewood Lounge guest pass, signed and dated. Thanks, I said. This'll get me through the door. Yes. Just, be discreet. The club prides itself on being invisible. I work for a man who prides himself on not moving. More than 10 feet a day. Discretion is the easy part. I stepped out, filed her expression away, half defiant, half afraid, and called the brownstone from the payphone in the lobby. She's rational, I told Wolfe when he picked up, but definitely in trouble. And the box? Still gone and still full of dirt. There was a pause. Then Wolfe said, "Pfui, return. We must speak of keys and confidences." I hung up, stepped out into the breeze, and started back toward the waiting silence of the brownstone. The air had turned. The box wasn't just a missing heirloom, it was a time bomb, and Wolfe had just agreed to start winding it back. I made it back to the brownstone in time to find Wolfe exactly where I'd left him, planted in the office chair like a stubborn oak, fingers steepled, eyes closed, and the sound of Beethoven low enough to suggest thought, not pleasure. That's how I knew we were officially on the case. He opened one eye as I stepped in and closed the door behind me. "She's telling the truth," I said, "or enough of it to convince me she's not the one who lifted the box." He didn't speak. He gestured faintly, meaning continue. "She claims there are only 4 people with access. Herself, the chairman of the lounge, a psychologist, and an art dealer named Marcia Verrill. They all had keys to the annex. And she's received a copy of a private letter from the box. Not a threat exactly, just a warning. Someone knows." Wolfe raised his eyebrows. "A copy, not the original? Typed, no signature, no demand, just proof of possession." "That is worse," he murmured. "It implies strategy, not impulse." He shifted his bulk and reached for the bell cord. I knew what that meant. A minute later, Fritz entered, crisp and collected as ever. "Beer," Wolfe said. Fritz bowed and vanished. I pulled out the small card Claire had given me and handed it over. "Guest pass. Gets me in the front door of the lounge." She signed. Wolfe took it with 2 fingers as if it might explode. He examined it, frowned at the gold embossing, and placed it on the edge of his desk like an unpleasant tip. "Tomorrow you will go to this lounge," he said. "Speak to the others. Do not be theatrical. I'll practice my subtlety tonight." Fritz returned with Wolfe's bottle, presented it like communion, and withdrew again. Wolfe took a sip, then fixed his gaze on the ceiling. "There is something unwholesome about communal secrecy," he muttered. 4 individuals, each presumed trustworthy, bound by silence. Eventually, one begins to test the others. Test them how? By introducing temptation, a leak, a missing piece, then observe. And see who flinches. Exactly. That sounded like something Wolfe might do himself. In fact, I wouldn't have been surprised if he'd already thought of his own variation on the game. But before we could cook up bait or start games of misdirection, I had to meet the other players. The next morning, I put on a suit that didn't scream private eye, checked my breath, and headed uptown to the Rosewood Lounge. It didn't look like much from the street, just another quiet building with too many curtains, but inside it was all dark wood, hushed voices, and a lingering scent of polished leather and cigar ghosts. A man behind a mahogany desk glanced at my card and gave a courteous nod. "This way, sir." He led me to a corner lounge room with tall bookshelves, a silent fireplace, and a circle of antique chairs so soft they might have been stitched from political compromise. The place wasn't just rich, it was rehearsed. A moment later, a woman entered, mid-40s, dressed like she curated estates instead of living in them. She extended her hand. "Marcia Verrill. You must be Mr. Goodwin." I smiled. Word travels fast in velvet circles. Claire called ahead. "She said you were discreet. Only when I'm paid to be." She sat across from me and crossed her legs. She didn't fidget, but her eyes did, sharp, angled, always appraising. "Did she tell you what she thinks happened?" she asked. "She told me someone took the box, that someone is using its contents, and she thinks it's one of us. You just used the word us. That makes things easier." Marcia studied me for a moment. "You're here to find out which of us is untrustworthy." I didn't reply. She already knew the answer. "I didn't take the box," she said. "I never even opened it. But you had a key." "Yes, everyone did. That was the point. Trust. Trust is fragile," I said. "Especially when you store secrets in a decorative coffin." Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. I pulled a small notebook from my coat and flipped it open. "Tell me about the others." "Langston, he's the chairman, old money, wears it like armor, doesn't like disruption. If he knew the box was missing, he'd sooner burn the lounge than call the police." "And Dr. Poe?" She hesitated. "He's charming, but too observant. You never quite know what he's thinking. That's why people pay him, isn't it?" "Exactly." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you really think Claire is innocent?" "I think she's scared," I said. "And scared people make mistakes, but they don't usually blackmail themselves." A door creaked open behind us, and a tall, lean man with white hair and the posture of an English professor stepped in. His tie was knotted too perfectly. "Langston," the man said, "and you must be Wolfe's emissary." "I go by Archie," I replied. "Of course you do." He walked with precision, each footstep evenly measured. I could see the authority he wore like cufflinks. "You're here to poke into things that were never meant to be poked," he said. "Only the parts already broken." He sat beside Marcia and gave me a long look. "Let me be clear, Mr. Goodwin, the box was never about leverage. It was about catharsis, a place to release burdens, not to pass judgment." "Someone disagreed." Langston's lips tightened. "I warned Claire against speaking outside. I told her it would invite suspicion. And yet here I am." "Yes, here you are." There was a silence, rich with unspoken history. Then another figure appeared in the doorway. A smaller man, bow tie askew, face full of wary intelligence. He moved like someone who preferred to be behind a desk. "Dr. Poe," he said, extending a hand. "Psychologist, former naval ethics, board reluctant member of this farce." I shook his hand. Pleasure. It won't be. He sat, folded his hands and glanced at the other two. I assume we're now suspects. Nobody's officially anything, I said. Yet. Langston leaned forward. You'll find nothing, Mr. Goodwin. The box is gone. And no one here benefits from what's been done. Then I'll just chat, observe, and vanish. Marcia tilted her head. Just like that? I'm very good at chatting. And vanishing. They didn't smile. None of them did. But they didn't protest either. After 15 more minutes of vague answers, polished denial and theatrical civility, I excused myself and left the lounge. Back in the cab I called Wolfe. They're clean, I said, too clean. Then they're dirty, Wolfe replied. Return. He hung up. I leaned back, staring at the skyline through the cab window, and wondered which of the three Velvet Voices was hiding something sharp beneath the cushion. The circle was drawn. Now Wolfe would close it. I made it back to the brownstone with the distinct feeling that velvet chairs weren't built for honest conversations. The three members of the so-called trusted circle had smiled just enough to be polite, said just enough to sound innocent, and offered me a collective alibi smoother than Fritz's hollandaise. In other words, someone was lying, and probably lying very well. Wolfe didn't speak right away when I reported in. He sat motionless behind his desk, flipping through a slim volume on fungus preservation, as if nothing less than mushroom decay deserved his attention. I waited. Finally he looked up. They performed? Like a dinner party with subpoenas, I said. Langston's all surface control. Verrill watches everyone like she catalogues them, and Dr. Poe, he's the kind who keeps his truths filed alphabetically in his head. Did you detect contradiction? No, but that's the problem. They were too polished, no stumble, no surprise. Either they practiced their innocence in the mirror, or they've got nothing to confess. Wolfe gave a non-committal grunt. Anne swiveled slightly in his chair. And yet the box is gone, which means someone's lying. He nodded once. We must eliminate coincidence. Interview those adjacent to the circle. Staff? Assistants? Precisely. That was Wolfe for you. If the suspects won't sweat, start loosening the collars of the people who pour their drinks and polish their secrets. I took that as permission and left the office with a fresh notebook, a sharpened pencil, and the resigned energy of a man about to ask suspicious questions in rooms lined with cognac. My first stop was the Rosewood Lounge, again. This time, I didn't bother with the circle of suspects. I asked the front desk for the staff supervisor, got a raised eyebrow, and then an escort down a narrow hallway to a door marked Staff Services. Inside was a neat office occupied by a man named Gilbert. He had the pinched expression of someone whose day always begins with a complaint and ends with a report. I understand you supervise the night cleaning crew, I said. Yes. Is there an issue with something? Not unless missing rosewood boxes are your department. His posture changed. Not alarm, but alertness. I've heard something about that, he said carefully. Good. Then this won't be a total shock. Gilbert sat behind his desk and folded his hands. We don't often see outside investigators. Here. Then you should enjoy the novelty. Were you on duty the night before Miss Kent received the letter? I was, as usual. Anyone else near the annex room? He hesitated. Well, I pressed. One of the junior staff, Thomas. Helvis? He was in the hallway near the annex. That's normal. He checks the wine cart inventory for the next day. But... Gilbert leaned in slightly, voice lowering. He told me the annex door was slightly ajar when he passed. That's not supposed to happen. It's kept locked. Always. Did he see anyone? No, but he said he... Heard voices, low male voices, then silence. What time was this? Just past midnight. Did he report it? He wasn't sure it was serious. By the time he looped back, the door was shut. I made a note. Can I speak? With him? Gilbert hesitated. He's off today. Home address? I'd have to call it. Do it. I'm not here to play games. 15 minutes later, I had an address in my notebook and was back out in the cold. Tomas lived in Queens, in a narrow brownstone shared with his cousins, and the scent of frying plantains. He answered the door wearing a Mets hoodie and a confused look. Yes? Tomas Alves. Yeah? Archie Goodwin. I'm with Mr. Nero Wolfe. We're looking into the missing item from the Rosewood Lounge. His expression changed fast, nervous but not guilty. Mr. Wolfe, like the detective? That's the one. He stepped aside, and I entered a modest front room with clean floors and a couch that had clearly survived more than one family generation. I didn't do anything wrong, he said almost before I sat down. Good. Then you'll have no problem telling me what you saw or heard. He nodded. I already told Gilbert. It was late. I was walking toward the annex. To check the wine cart list, I passed the door. It was open, just a little. I thought maybe someone was inside. Anyone? I don't know. I heard voices. 2 men. They were arguing, quiet, but sharp, like they were trying not to be heard. Any words you caught? He thought for a second. One of them said you promised, and something like, it's not yours to touch. Then it stopped. Did you recognize the voices? He looked uncomfortable. I think maybe one was Dr. Poe. He has this soft way of talking, kind of deliberate. And the other could have been Langston, but I'm not sure. Did you see anyone leave? No. I went down the hall, came back 10 minutes later, and the door was closed. No one in sight. I sat for a second. Tomas wasn't making it up. His nerves were too genuine and his details too precise. Don't talk about this to anyone, I said. If someone else asks, refer them to Wolfe. Understood? Yes, sure, I don't want trouble. Then keep your ears open and your mouth shut. You've done well. I left him with a pat on the shoulder and a reinforced sense that the Rosewood Lounge was less of a haven and more of a powder keg. 2 men late at night arguing at the annex door, and the box vanishing soon after. It wasn't proof, but it was pressure. I called Wolfe from the corner deli, where the smell of pastrami was stronger than the phone signal. Heard something interesting, I told him. Midnight quarrel near the box. Poe and Langston are prime candidates. And no camera? Of course not. That would have made things too easy. Wolfe exhaled. Return. We must begin. Begin what? The unraveling. I hung up and ordered a coffee to go. If Wolfe was about to start pulling threads, I had a feeling someone's expensive reputation was about to get caught in the stitching. And just like that, the real game began. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was seated exactly where I'd left him, an unmoving silhouette against the curve of his massive chair, fingers together, eyes half-lidded, and his expression somewhere between preoccupied and thoroughly disgusted with humanity. Fritz must have brought him another beer because the empty bottle stood like a quiet monument on the coaster near his elbow. I filled him in on Tomas Alves's late-night eavesdropping, the cracked annex door, the muffled voices and the recognizable tones of Dr. Poe and Langston exchanging low accusations. Wolfe didn't speak for a full minute. When he did, it was with a single word. Plausible. I waited, but not yet sufficient. That was his way of saying the evidence was promising, but not enough to pin a tail on either suspect. Wolfe never moved until the game board was set, the pieces arranged, and the endgame inevitable. Still, something about this one was itching him. "I must know what was taken," Wolfe said, finally sitting upright. "We already know that." "No, we do not," he replied, voice sharp. "We know a box was removed. We know its contents were presumed to be compromising, but we do not know what precisely was in it. Miss Kent believes she was targeted because a copy of a letter referencing her exists. But for the thief to act, the item they wanted must have had direct value." He leaned forward slightly, and for Wolfe, that was nearly a lunge. "Find out," he said. "From who?" "From the one who fears it most." I blinked. "You mean Claire?" He gave me a thin, disdainful glance, as if I'd suggested we consult a fortune-teller. "Miss Verrill," he said. He was right. Verrill had struck me as the one most practiced in secrets, the kind of woman who considered discretion an art form and disclosure a cardinal sin. I didn't need more convincing. The next morning I made my way back to the gallery where she worked. Verrill and Stone, fine acquisitions. It was housed in one of those slender mid-block buildings that pretend to be modest while sheltering paintings, more expensive than mid-sized sedans. Inside, everything smelled of waxed wood, aging canvas, and careful silence. She greeted me in a tailored charcoal suit and led me into a private viewing room where a half-lit oil painting of a forgotten Dutch merchant loomed over us like a judge in repose. "Another visit, Mr. Goodwin," she said, arching a brow. "Are you beginning to enjoy our company? Like one enjoys cold rain, only when there's a fire waiting afterward." She tilted her head, vaguely amused. "I need more clarity." "On the box," I said, opening my notebook. "Not the wood, the contents." She folded her arms and studied me. "I've told you all I know." "No, you told me what was comfortable." She didn't flinch, but something flickered across her eyes. I leaned in slightly. "Here's what I think. The box wasn't just a symbolic vault. It was a repository for leverage. People put letters in it when they couldn't burn them, but needed a place where they'd be safe and useful." Am I warm? She looked down. I didn't want to say anything. Not at first. But yes, that's close to the truth. I let her talk. Some letters were personal. Some were insurance, old rivalries, quiet scandals. Everyone assumed they'd be sealed away forever, until someone decided they weren't. She nodded. I never opened the box. I never wanted to. But a year ago, Langston insisted on reviewing the contents. He said it was a matter of propriety, that he needed to protect the legacy of the lounge. Did he? He claimed he just glanced, but after that things changed. The box was moved to a different cabinet. The locks were upgraded and the key rotation was altered. That was something. A subtle shift in control. I tapped my pen. Was there anything in the box that might have pushed someone to theft? Something actionable? Marcia hesitated. There was a letter, unsigned, undated, but unmistakable. It described a series of payments, cash, monthly, to a former Senate aide. It implied the money was hush money tied to an appointment that never happened. The E. Author never named themselves, but the details pointed to Langston. That made the air a little heavier. Did anyone else know about that letter? I'm not sure, but if I figured it out, I imagine Poe might have as well. He has a clinical talent for implication. And Claire Kent? She shook her head. She knew about the box. Not its contents, not all of them. Did Langston know you'd seen that letter? Not directly, but he suspected. He once asked me if I thought people's sins should stay buried. I said that depended on whether the cemetery had a guard. I stood, slipping my notebook back into my coat. That's helpful, I said. Thank you. Do be careful. Mr. Goodwin, the kind of secrets we're circling have sharp edges. I've cut myself before. She didn't smile. Just watched me go. Back at the brownstone, I relayed it all to Wolfe, who listened in rare stillness, his fingertips, drumming once on the armrest when I mentioned the hush money. There, he said softly, the fulcrum. The motive? Yes. If Langston feared exposure, especially by someone in the lounge circle, he might remove the evidence, but that doesn't explain the blackmail. Unless it wasn't Langston who stole it. Wolfe gave a satisfied grunt. We were silent for a beat. Then I noticed something odd. Where's the silver matchstick holder? Wolfe's brow furrowed. What? The one on your desk. You always keep it by your beer coaster. He looked down. It was gone. That might not seem like much. A matchstick holder, small and antique. But Wolfe's desk was sacred. Nothing moved without his permission. And yet it had moved, or vanished. We both stared at the empty spot for a second. A cleaner was in here, I asked. No, Wolfe said slowly. Fritz knows better. Well, I didn't take it, so unless it sprouted legs. Wolfe narrowed his eyes, checked the drawers. I did. Nothing. He sat very still, then exhaled through his nose. Something has been disturbed, he said. Something subtle, intended to test my attention. You think someone was in the office? Not just in it, close enough to touch my desk. That sent a shiver down the back of my neck. Wolfe might have had the mobility of a statue, but nothing in that room ever changed without him noticing, and nothing ever disappeared. The matchstick holder, he said slowly, was a gift from a judge, stainless, inscribed. Someone left a message. No, someone took one. That was the moment the case stopped being about letters and velvet clubs. Now it was personal, and Wolfe was wide awake. Wolfe rarely raised his voice, he didn't need to. But when something disappeared from inside his office, his sanctuary, his inner sanctum, the volume didn't need to go up for the temperature to drop. The air inside the brownstone thickened, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stood staring at the empty spot on the desk where the silver matchstick holder used to live. A small item, sure, but the implications were larger than Wolfe's ego, and that's saying something. Someone had crossed the threshold, past Fritz's ears, tiptoed into the inner sanctum, and removed a personal object from within arm's reach of the great man's chair, which meant either someone was stupid or someone was confident. Wolfe sat motionless, then leaned forward. Not a dramatic shift, but for him it might as well have been lunging out of a trench. "No other object was touched," he said. I double-checked the desk. "Nothing I can see." The inscribed holder was not decorative. It had weight, significance. The engraving read, "To Nero Wolfe, for illumination of truth." It was a gift from Judge Trahan in 1948. I nodded slowly. So, not just silver. Symbolic. Precisely. A message sent and a message received. Fritz was called in, and we ran through the schedule like generals plotting a defense. No cleaners, no repairmen, no deliveries. Fritz had been home all evening, aside from his usual time in the kitchen and greenhouse. I had been out chasing leads, and Wolfe, well, Wolfe doesn't go anywhere without seismic activity being reported. That left only one possibility. "A visitor," I said. "Someone who came during the day when I was out." "There was only one," Fritz said. "This morning. A courier, apparently. He claimed to be delivering a sealed envelope to you." "To me?" "Yes, sir, I took it on your behalf, but the envelope was blank. It held only a note. For Mr. Goodwin, personal. I placed it on your desk." "I never saw it." Wolfe's nostrils flared. "You are certain you left it on the desk?" "Yes, sir. And it is not there now?" "It wasn't. No note, no envelope, no silver matchstick holder. I suppose we're not dealing with a common thief," I said. "They come for gold, not symbolism." Wolfe stared at the desk like it had betrayed him. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "someone wishes to intimidate me." "Bold move." "Foolish move, but revealing." He fell silent again, and I knew better than to interrupt. The gears in Wolfe's mind were turning, and when they turned, at that speed they usually threw sparks. A minute later he spoke. "You will call Saul Panzer." Now we were escalating. I went to the phone in the hall, dialed Saul's number, and briefed him in clipped tones. He didn't ask questions, just said he'd be by within the hour. When he arrived, Saul looked exactly as Saul always did, calm, precise, and underwhelming, in the way that makes him the most dangerous man in a room. Wolfe brought him up to speed with his usual economy of language. "The box is missing. The contents potentially implicate Langston. Miss Kent is receiving typed copies of personal letters. And now my matchstick holder has been taken, likely by someone posing as a courier. I require confirmation of entry points, timelines, surveillance, if any." Saul nodded once. "Understood." "Begin at the Rosewood Lounge. Follow with Miss Verrill and Dr. Poe quietly," I added, "and if anyone sends another envelope, I'll open it with tongs." Saul left, and Wolfe sank back into his chair with a sigh that could have toppled smaller men. "We are being watched," he said. I didn't like the sound of that. "You mean someone's spying on us?" "No, not watching in the literal sense. I mean monitored, prodded, as one watches a test subject. So they're trying to measure how we respond." "Yes, the envelope was bait. The theft, psychological leverage. Whoever we're dealing with is not only intelligent, but enjoys the illusion of superiority." "Langston?" "Possible, but his power comes from silence, not showmanship. Poe? He observes, but his actions remain concealed. This was a performance." That left only one member of the inner circle, Marcia Verrill. "She warned me," I said. "Said some secrets have sharp edges." "Indeed," Wolfe murmured, but that may have been self-preservation, not threat. Wolfe closed his eyes and placed his fingertips together again. The thief wanted to unsettle me. That is a mistake. I am not a man who is easily unsettled. You will return to the Rosewood Lounge tomorrow. To talk to Langston? No, to look carefully. At what? At anything that is not what it appears to be. I knew that was as close as I'd get to specifics. Wolfe rarely issued step-by-step orders. He preferred the world to offer him data and Archie Goodwin to translate it into truth. So the next morning I dressed in grey and charm and returned to the lounge. This time I took the long way around. The Rosewood's main corridor was lined with framed photographs and subtle sconces, all designed to project history and privilege. But history has a funny way of hiding handprints. I paused near the back hallway that led to the annex. I knew the layout now. Tomas had described it well. The annex door had been at the center of the night's mystery, and I wanted a closer look. There was no one around. I approached the door. It was locked, as expected. But something about the doorknob caught my attention, a smudge, barely visible but there. And just below it, on the floor molding, a small indentation, as if something had been rested there, maybe a small box, or perhaps an envelope. I took a quick photo with the tiny camera I kept in my coat pocket. Wolfe wouldn't believe it otherwise. Back in the lounge, I spotted Langston seated near the window, reading the Times. I walked past him without stopping. He didn't acknowledge me, but his eyes flicked upward as I passed. Just once. I found a side table behind the bar and opened the guest book. It was a thick ledger, mostly names and arrival times, but one line jumped out at me, courier. Private guest parcel, Langston. No name, no return. Dated the day before the matchstick holder vanished. I made a copy and left quietly, lungs full of cologne and questions. Back at the brownstone, I handed Wolfe the photo and the ledger entry. He looked at both, then leaned back in satisfaction. Langston received a parcel from a courier. A day later, we received one with an internal theft. Too neat to be a coincidence? Precisely. It suggests orchestration. Which makes him the maestro? No, it makes him the decoy. Wolfe closed his eyes. Mr. Goodwin, he said softly, we are near the fulcrum. The balance will shift soon, and when it does, it will land hard. He opened his eyes again, sharper than glass. Have Fritz prepare dinner. We dine early, I must think. And as I left him to his silence, I couldn't help but think, we weren't just chasing a thief anymore. We were chasing a performance, one that hadn't yet finished its final act. The following morning began with eggs Benedict, 2 cups of precisely brewed coffee, and a mood in the brownstone so still you could have mistaken it for a mausoleum. Wolfe didn't speak through breakfast. He didn't glance at the mail. He simply sat beneath the high ceiling of the dining room, his eyes staring not at the food but past it, as if the walls themselves were forming syllables only he could interpret. I knew that look. He was close. Not close to action. He abhorred that word, but close to a conclusion. And when Wolfe got close, the best thing to do was get out of his way. He finished his final bite, wiped the corner of his mouth with slow ceremony, and said, Mr. Goodwin, please summon all 3 of them. Langston, Poe, Verrill? Precisely. You will inform them that their presence is required at my office at 5:30 this evening. The request is non-negotiable. And if they decline? He raised an eyebrow. They won't. That was the entirety of my instruction. I got on the phone and placed 3 very cordial, very deliberate calls. I framed the invitation with the usual Wolfe finesse, courteous but unmistakably authoritative. Each recipient responded with their own variation of composed alarm. Langston was clipped and formal, asked no questions. Marcia Verrill paused for a long time before answering yes, her tone guarded. And Poe? Well, Poe chuckled softly and said, "He's ready then?" That confirmed what I already suspected. None of them believed in the brownstone as just an address. They understood it as Wolfe's court, and tonight they were being summoned to a judgment. By the time 5:30 rolled around, Fritz had prepared the room with quiet efficiency. The chairs were arranged, the lighting subdued. Wolfe had changed into his second-best suit and was seated at his desk like a monarch expecting 3 slightly tarnished nobles. I stood to the side, notebook in hand. Langston arrived first, on time, naturally. He wore a 3-piece suit darker, then a midnight oath, and offered Wolfe a single nod as he sat. His eyes scanned the room, never stopping on me. He didn't like being here. Marcia Verrill followed 5 minutes later, poised as ever in a tailored jacket and gloves she didn't remove. She gave Wolfe a faint smile that never reached her eyes and sat without prompting. Dr. Poe entered last. He wore a charcoal coat and an expression carved from neutrality. He offered no greetings, just sat, folded his hands and waited. Wolfe didn't speak immediately. He let the room breathe. He always said that silence was a better tool than interruption, and in this case he wielded it like a chisel. When he did begin, it was with a voice as smooth and immovable as stone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. I do not believe in wasting words, so I shall speak plainly. A theft has occurred. An item of significance was removed from the Rosewood Lounge. That item and the letters it contained are now being weaponized." Langston cleared his throat. "If this is to be a discussion of rumors—" "It is not," Wolfe cut in flatly. "This is a discussion of fact. Miss Kent has received copies of personal correspondence, material drawn from the stolen box. I have confirmed that at least one of you was in the annex late at night, and one of you has also orchestrated an intrusion into my home." That drew a reaction. Langston's lips tightened. Verrill blinked once. Poe tilted his head but said nothing. "Yes," Wolfe continued, voice still calm. "Someone entered this office under false pretenses and removed a small silver matchstick holder. It was symbolic, and it was meant to provoke me." I stepped forward slightly. "The same courier that delivered a blank envelope to me also appeared in the lounge guest log under Langston's account." Langston turned to me sharply. "I requested no such courier." "Yet it's in the ledger," I replied. "Dated the day before." Wolfe's holder disappeared. Wolfe raised a hand. "That alone does not convict you, Mr. Langston, but it does confirm orchestration. The theft of the matchstick holder was a message. I have now read it." No one spoke. Wolfe let the silence expand again, like smoke filling a room. "You believed," Wolfe said, shifting his gaze between the 3, "that the power rested in possession. That with the box gone, the game was yours, but you were mistaken. The game is not about the letters, it is about motive." Marcia Verrill finally spoke. "And what do you believe the motive to be, Mr. Wolfe?" He turned his eyes to her. "Control," he said. The contents of that box, some petty, some profound, held currency. Someone decided to collect it, but that person needed one. Thing first, chaos, the illusion of betrayal. Wolfe opened a file on his desk and extracted a folded sheet. He handed it to me and I crossed the room, offering it to Dr. Poe. He unfolded it and read it slowly. Then he looked up. "This is a copy of one of my therapy notes." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Recovered this morning by Saul Panzer. Placed anonymously at a private mailbox near Miss Verrill's residence." There was no threat attached, but the implication was clear. Someone was showing their hand, a false hand. Poe stared at the page. "But I never placed this in the box." "Precisely. It was never in the box," Wolfe said, "which means someone is forging documents, replicating the style, tone, content, and sending them not to extort but to distract." Verrill's voice was soft. "To shift suspicion." "Exactly." Langston leaned forward, voice tense. "Then what's your theory, Mr. Wolfe?" "My theory," Wolfe said, "is that the box was taken not by someone who feared exposure, but by someone who craved disruption. Someone who wanted leverage, not to use it, but to destroy the dynamic it supported." He looked straight at Verrill. "You warned Mr. Goodwin that secrets had sharp edges, but you did more than warn. You leveraged that perception. You framed Langston with the courier. You planted the note near your own residence to appear innocent, and you entered my office. Your gloves gave you the freedom to leave no fingerprints. It was you." A beat of silence. Then Verrill, calm as ever, said, "Can you prove that?" Wolfe closed his eyes for a long moment. "No, not to a courtroom standard, but I don't need to. The truth stands whether or not it testifies." She didn't deny it, just smiled faintly. "I wanted to end it," she said quietly. "That ridiculous lounge, those boxes of filth pretending to be ritual, Langston's hypocritical sermons, Poe's observations, Claire's blind trust. It was all rotting. So I sped up the decay." Wolfe didn't move. Neither did anyone else. "You won't tell the police," she added. "No," Wolfe agreed, "but you will resign your position at the lounge, and you will return the box. Mr. Goodwin will accompany you to retrieve it." Langston's face remained frozen. Poe merely closed his eyes. Verrill rose without a word. I followed her to the door, and as she left, Wolfe said the final words of the evening. "Secrets only hold power until you name them. After that, they become confessions." The door closed behind her, and the storm began to pass. We left the brownstone just before 8. That alone was enough to qualify the night as historic. Wolfe didn't come, of course. He never would. He'd dispatched me, as always, with instructions folded in tone and precision, but his influence trailed me like a shadow as I stepped into the cab with Marcia Verrill, her gloved hands resting neatly on her lap, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak on the ride over. I didn't push. Some people, when they've been found out, unravel at the seams. Others hold tighter to what's left. Marcia Verrill belonged to the latter group, the kind who'd rather turn to ash than allow a crack to show. The destination was a storage facility uptown, a place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. Brick exterior, narrow windows, the kind of building that had probably held fur coats in the 60s and secrets ever since. "This way," she said simply. I followed her through a side entrance down a carpeted hallway with too many locks and not enough lighting. We reached Unit 19B. She produced a key from her handbag, unlocked the door and flicked on a low-watt bulb overhead. The room was narrow but immaculate, and there, centered on a waist-high pedestal of polished wood, was the rosewood box. It was smaller than I'd imagined, more intimate, a modest thing to carry the weight of so many private truths. Marcia stepped aside and gestured. There it is. I approached slowly. No lock now. Just a sliding panel and a silver latch that had been carefully undone. "Everything still inside?" I asked. "Yes. I didn't destroy them. That was never my aim." "Just chaos?" Her lips pressed into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No," she said. "Clarity. The lounge was built on the illusion that secrecy binds people together. But secrets corrode. They don't unify, they divide. I was tired of the pretense. I wanted to let in air. Light, even if it stung." I didn't answer, not because she didn't deserve one, but because I'd seen that logic. Before too many times. The truth wielded like a knife instead of a salve. I snapped on gloves, opened the box carefully, and took a quick inventory. Dozens of envelopes, some yellowing, some fresh. Thick, expensive stationery, typewritten notes. Folded confessions. No titles, no senders, no signatures. Just a choir of voices hoping to remain anonymous while still heard. "This all goes back with me," I said. She nodded. "Of course." I took the box in both hands. It was heavier than it looked, and secured the latch. As we walked out, she paused at the doorway. "You're wondering why I returned it. I'm wondering why you took it in the first place." She considered that. "Because it was time someone asked the question, what are we protecting and why? You could have asked it without dragging people into a game." And no one would have answered. She held my gaze a moment longer, then turned away. The cab ride back to the brownstone was silent again. I didn't say good night when she stepped out a block early. She didn't look back. When I reached the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair naturally, with a fresh beer and a plate of cheese and fruit in front of him, untouched. "The box?" he asked. "Delivered," I said, setting it gently on his desk. He glanced at it with the same weight he gave to crime scene photos or botanical rarities, not judgmental, just observant, contained. "You inventoried it?" "Nothing appears removed. All the envelopes are there." He nodded once, a satisfied motion. Then he turned his attention to the item that had started his personal indignation, the matchstick holder. It sat in its place again, polished, as if it had never vanished. "Saul retrieved it," Wolfe said. "Miss Verrill deposited it in a secure drop box rented under a pseudonym, a final theatrical gesture. And now the curtains close. For her, yes," he murmured. "We didn't open the rosewood box, not yet." Wolfe wasn't one to violate secrets casually. He let the object sit there like a guest at the dinner table, uninvited but tolerated. "She was right about one thing," I said, removing my coat. "Secrets do divide." "Only when weaponized," Wolfe replied. "Otherwise they are ballast, quiet weight. But they never stay quiet. No, that is human error, not strategic design." He sipped his beer, the bitterness seeming to suit the evening. I moved to the window and looked out over 35th Street. The lamps glowed dimly against the sidewalk, and the city thrummed like a quiet drumbeat, always a few paces behind the truth. "There'll be fallout," I said. "Langston might walk. Poe won't trust anyone again. Claire's going to question every shadow." "Yes," Wolfe said simply. "And Verrill?" She will reinvent herself. That is her specialty. He stood slowly and stepped toward the box. For a moment I thought he might open it, but instead he adjusted its position on the desk, rotated it slightly, and stepped back. "We will return it," he said, "to its owners. You trust them with it?" "No," Wolfe said, "but I trust them to live with it." He turned away then, reaching for the cheese knife, his appetite finally catching up to the day's deduction. As for me, I sat in the red chair and let the room settle. The brownstone had been breached, a truth had been stolen, and a performance had run its course. But in the end, Wolfe had won. Not with rage, not with exposure, with stillness, with logic, with patience. The matchstick holder caught a slant of light on the desk. Illumination indeed. The next morning, the brownstone resumed its usual rhythm, which is to say nothing at all happened unless Wolfe permitted it. Fritz's omelette was perfect, as expected, and the mail was once again filtered by my hand before it came within 50 feet of Wolfe's. After the previous week's envelope stunt, I wasn't taking chances. Wolfe, for his part, remained quieter than usual. He didn't comment on the weather, the food, or even the orchids, though I'd caught him staring a little too long at a new Vanda hybrid Fritz had rotated into the display. That meant his mind was still chewing on something, maybe not the box anymore, but something tangled in the aftermath. It wasn't over, not quite. After breakfast, I found myself back in his office, sitting across from him with a cup of lukewarm coffee and a notepad, open more for habit than necessity. The box still sat on his desk untouched. Like a guest, no one had the heart to ask to leave. Wolfe finally spoke. "We must return it." "Back to the Rosewood?" "Yes, under terms." That got my attention. Terms? Indeed. The lounge must agree to dissolve the annex arrangement. No more boxes, no more shared keys, no more pretense of sacred confidentiality, and the contents of this box will be sealed, catalogued, and secured in private legal custody. "You think they'll go for that?" "They will," Wolfe said with certainty, "because the alternative is exposure and chaos." I could see his logic. Langston wouldn't want the stain. Poe would avoid confrontation at all costs. And as for Claire Kent, well, she'd survived this closer call with her reputation intact. She'd gladly trade silence for stability. "I'll arrange it," I said. But Wolfe didn't respond. His gaze was elsewhere, settled not on me, or the box, but on a folded slip of paper resting beside the beer coaster. I hadn't noticed it before. "What's that?" I asked. Wolfe tapped it with one finger. "A letter, delivered this morning." "From?" He pushed it toward me. I opened it, typed, anonymous, no salutation. "You've restored the artifact." That's commendable, but the box wasn't the only copy. Wolfe watched my face as I read. "Someone still playing," I said quietly. "Yes." "Verrill?" "Unlikely." Her exit was definitive. The game no longer interests her. "Then who?" Wolfe was silent. The letter had no threats, no demands, just a reminder. Knowledge once leaked is never recaptured. I folded it again and slipped it into my jacket pocket. "Do you want Saul on it?" "No, let it sit." That wasn't like him. Wolfe never liked loose ends, but this one, he was letting it dangle. "To what end?" I asked. He finally met my eyes. "Because now I know the rules." I didn't press. If Wolfe had decided not to chase a lead, it meant one of two things. Either he already knew the answer and didn't want it, or he'd calculated the cost of truth and found it not worth the price. That afternoon, I made my way to the Rosewood Lounge, rosewood box in hand, and requested a meeting with Langston and Dr. Poe. They came down from their private alcoves looking older, or maybe just less rehearsed. I laid it out simply. Wolfe's terms: take them and the box returns, ignore them and the box disappears forever. Langston's jaw worked for a moment, his teeth grinding against pride. Poe glanced at the box like it was a museum exhibit. They agreed, of course. The annex would be closed, the vault removed, the letters catalogued and sealed, never to surface unless legally required. Wolfe had orchestrated not just the solving of a case, but the quiet dismantling of a dangerous tradition. And yet, as I carried the box into the private legal firm Wolfe had designated, a discreet operation specializing in dead letters and suppressed legacies, I couldn't help feeling the weight of it again. Secrets don't stay buried, they leak. They whisper, they find cracks. The lawyer, a woman in grey with no surname on her door, signed the receipt, tucked the box into a vault, and sealed the contract Wolfe had prepared. Everything was official, clean, done, almost. That night, Wolfe dined on broiled trout, buttered green beans, and fresh-baked rye. He ate with his usual precision, but there was a trace less gravity in the room, as if something uncoiled had finally been allowed to rest. I sipped coffee and waited for him to say something reflective, some final pronouncement about ethics or deceit or the fragility of reputation. Instead, he reached for the matchstick holder, turned it in his fingers, and placed it back in its spot. Then he looked up. "Mr. Goodwin, do you know why people confess? Because they're caught. No, that is why they confess publicly. But privately, people confess because secrets weigh more when they're held alone. That box didn't seem to be lightening anyone." "It was never meant to," Wolfe said. "It was an illusion of relief. People believed they were unburdening themselves, but in truth they were inviting others to carry the same weight. And Viril wanted to drop it all. She wanted to watch others stumble under it." He stood, walking over to the bookshelf. He adjusted one volume by a fraction of an inch, then turned back. "There are things that deserve to remain private, Archie, but that does not mean they should be stored communally." I nodded. "So we've done our good deed for the week." Wolfe gave a grunt that might have been amusement. "No," he said. "We've prevented a worse deed. That is not the same." Later, as I walked past the office to turn in for the night, I glanced once more at the desk. The matchstick holder gleamed quietly. The box was gone. And the only sound in the room was the creak of the chair as Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. Another mystery resolved. Another silence restored, for now. The thing about solving a case, particularly one where the crime lives in shadows and whispers, is that resolution rarely arrives with a bang. There's no parade, no applause, and certainly no thanks. You just get your silence back, if you're lucky. It had been 3 days since the Rosewood box found its new tomb in that tidy, high-walled legal office Wolfe trusted with secrets more than people. The brownstone had resumed its predictable hum. Fritz prepared meals on time with military exactitude, orchids were rotated according to Wolfe's botanical gospel, and I fielded the usual blend of inquiries, most of them unworthy of anything. more than a polite decline, but something still hung in the air. Not quite unrest, more like unfinished breath. On the fourth morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed not to Wolfe, not to me, but to the brownstone itself. No return address. No postage, hand-delivered. That didn't set off alarms on its own. After all, we had enough eccentric ex-clients and secretaries with a flair for the dramatic to populate a small theatre company. But the handwriting was careful, precise, no flourish, no signature. Wolfe naturally didn't touch it. He stared at it like it might reveal its contents through sheer surrender. I picked it up, slit the seal with the small letter opener shaped like a miniature sword, and slid out a single sheet, typed again. This time longer. You have removed the box, but not its echoes. You've silenced the circle, but not its watchful eye. There is more to uncover. There are deeper vaults, no signature, no demand. Just one final line. The lounge was only the surface. I read it twice and handed it to Wolfe without comment. He scanned it, set it on the corner of his desk, and didn't speak for nearly 5 full minutes. I sat, waited, didn't blink. Then he said, "It's not a threat." "No, no, it's a temptation." To do what? To keep digging, to chase the next thread, to pry until the quiet we restored begins unraveling. I leaned back in my chair. "You think it's a bluff?" "I think it's bait." "But you're not biting." He looked at me. "Would you?" I gave it some thought. "Honestly?" "I might. Curiosity's a hard thing to kill." "Yes," Wolfe said dryly, "like fungus, persistent, uninvited." But I could tell. He was thinking about it. Not acting, not planning, but thinking. The machinery in his head had shifted gears just slightly. The case was closed technically. The box had been recovered. Miss Kent's crisis had been averted. Miss Verrill's quiet exile was in motion. The lounge, so carefully propped up by secrets and antique decorum, was shuttering its little chamber of confessions. But someone, somewhere, wanted Wolfe to know that it wasn't over, that there were more layers, and that they were still watching. That night, we didn't talk about the note. Wolfe buried himself in a dense monograph on ancient Hungarian horticulture, and I sat near the bookshelf, pretending to read a detective novel that, frankly, could have used more Archie Goodwin. The silence wasn't heavy, just stretched. It was almost midnight when Wolfe spoke again. "Do you recall the third letter Miss Kent received? The copy of the affair with the federal judge?" "Yes." "What about it?" "It was typed impeccably, but too impeccably." I frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning it lacked one thing that would appear in any real letter written under pressure. Emotion?" "Typos," Wolfe said. That made me pause. "She said it was a copy of a handwritten note, right?" I asked. "Yes, but it was too perfect. Punctuation, spacing, alignment. It read like a performance." "You think it was a forgery?" "I think it was a script." He rose from his chair. That didn't happen often. It signaled something more than deduction. It meant momentum. Wolfe walked to the globe near the wall, spun it slightly without looking at it, and then stopped. It with his palm. "Someone," he said, "was testing not only Miss Kent but me. They anticipated my interest. They guided it." "To what end?" "To see if I would pursue the larger stage." I let that hang for a second. You think there's more than just the lounge? I think the lounge was a rehearsal, a trial of confidence. Someone was watching to see how I would react to a controlled breach. And now they want to see if I'll follow them past the curtain. Precisely. I stood. So what now? We wait? No, Wolfe said. We remain exactly where we are. He returned to his chair, settled in, and reached for his beer. If they want to see how I react, he said, then let them observe the absence of action. That's it? For now. It was Wolfe's ultimate strategy, stillness as a weapon. And yet, as I turned in that night, I couldn't help feeling that we'd just been pulled into something bigger. The next morning brought no new letters, no new visitors, no grand revelations. But at precisely 10:42 the phone rang. I answered. A voice, calm, unfamiliar, spoke 2 words before the line went dead. Rosewood. Again. I stared at the receiver for a long time. Then I went to tell Wolfe. And for the first time in days, he smiled. There are words that carry weight depending on where you are when you hear them. Again, for instance, might sound like nothing more than a complaint if you're standing in line at a bakery. But when it's uttered in a whisper over a dead phone line after a week of secrets, blackmail, and a missing silver matchstick holder, it stops being casual. It becomes a signal. I walked back into the office and handed Wolfe the message like I was delivering an uninvited ghost. He didn't ask me to repeat it. He knew the tone, the tactic, the intention. Rosewood, again, I said. Wolfe didn't blink. The caller hung up, right after the words. Not a click, more like the line dissolved. Male or female? Could have been either, low, clear, emotionless. Could have been a machine if the timing hadn't been so perfect. He grunted. They know when we close the case. They want us to open it again. He didn't move, but his mind was pacing. The box was returned, the annex was shuttered. The lounge had been disinfected, reputationally speaking. But the note, the letter, and now this, suggested someone wasn't finished. Maybe they had more leverage, maybe they wanted to play a longer game. Or maybe Wolfe, despite all his composure, had misjudged just how deep the Rosewood rot ran. You'll go back, he said finally. To the lounge? Yes, quietly, not to question. To observe. Observe what exactly? Shifts, he said. Expressions, patterns. What people do when they think the game is over. So I went. I wore grey again. Neutral, forgettable. I took no notebook, no badge, and gave no names. I walked in through the side door, nodded at the same host who now eyed me with that practiced discretion of places that thrive on secrets, and settled into a corner of the main room. It hadn't changed. The walls still bore the same framed oil portraits of long-dead financiers and club dignitaries. The carpets were deep and silent. Cigar smoke hung in the air like memory. But something was off. Langston wasn't in his usual chair. Neither was Poe. And the staff were quieter than usual, which was saying something. There was movement, yes, but it lacked rhythm. Eyes shifted more. Doors stayed closed longer. Then I noticed her, Claire Kent. She hadn't mentioned still coming to the lounge, but there she was, in the far alcove, speaking to a woman I didn't recognize. Her posture was tight, voice low. She glanced around once, not seeing me, but I saw her. She was anxious. Less the composed prosecutor I'd met in a federal office, more like someone playing a hand she didn't trust. I waited until the woman left. then made my move. I didn't sit, just stood near the column and spoke softly. Didn't. I expect to find you back here. She stiffened slightly, then turned. Mr. Goodwin, I didn't expect to see you either. Call it nostalgia or curiosity. Then you're wasting your time. It's over. That's what I thought until someone told me it wasn't. She hesitated. What do you mean? I watched her carefully. We got a call. This morning. Just 2 words. She paled slightly. Rosewood. Again. Claire exhaled through her nose. I told them to stop. Told who? She glanced down, lips pressed together. Then, there's more than one copy. The letters? She nodded. Not all of them. Some. I don't know how many. But someone had been making duplicates for months. Quietly. Before the theft. Maybe even before the annex protocols. Changed. And you didn't mention this? I wasn't sure until last night, she said. I received a second message, a typed note. Not threatening, just informative. You have it? She hesitated again, then opened her purse and handed me a folded sheet. I read it. Your silence was expected, but so is your guilt. Others will ask questions. Be prepared to answer without lying. I refolded it. Still no signature. Still the same machine-typed format, she added. Someone's playing long odds, I said. Yes, she said, but they're not bluffing. I asked her if she'd told Langston. She said he'd left town. Business in Geneva, apparently. Dr. Poe was still around, but had stopped returning her calls. She wasn't sure if Verrill had spoken to anyone since the confrontation at the brownstone, so everyone had retreated, or scattered, or closed the doors tighter. Only the notes kept coming. I left the lounge without finishing my drink and headed straight back to Wolfe. He listened. Every word. Then nodded once. It was never about... The box, he said. No, the box was a symbol. The real danger was never its contents, but the fact that someone had access long before the theft. An inside job. Not just inside, he said. Structural. The system itself was flawed. Multiple keys, no audits, no controls. And you think someone exploited that just to make a point? Not just to make a point, to destabilize. I frowned. Destabilize what? A lounge full of overpaid aristocrats and quiet scandal junkies? No, Wolfe said. To destabilize the idea of trust. That gave me pause. You think this was about a larger experiment? Yes, a test of fault lines, and we passed. Barely. He gave a half shrug. Barely is sufficient. Then he turned to the envelope Claire had provided and examined the letter for a moment. This is new, he said. Different. Tone? No, different spacing. Look. I peered over his shoulder. The typeface is slightly wider. The line spacing more generous. Different machine. He nodded. A different sender. Or the same sender signaling a change. A new phase, or a new actor. He folded the letter carefully and slid it into a folder marked Rosewood, his own naming convention for cases with residue. That meant he wasn't done thinking about it. Not yet. He leaned back, eyes half-lidded. They'll come again, he said. The notes? No. The people, Poe, Langston, Claire, one by one, because now they're not just afraid of exposure, They're afraid of not knowing who's in control. And they think you might be. Indeed. He reached for his beer, sipped, and said without irony, I detest leadership, but I am accustomed to being obeyed. That was the closest Wolfe would ever come to saying he had just become the de facto guardian of whatever rotting institution lay behind the lounge's polished doors. And as I stood to leave the room, I realized something else. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The box might be gone, but the door it unlocked had only just creaked open. 3 days passed without a call, a letter, or a knock at the door. Wolfe didn't say it aloud, but I knew what he was thinking because I was thinking it too. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that happens not at the end of a storm, but just before. The next one makes landfall. It was late afternoon when the silence broke. The doorbell rang. Not the sharp, intrusive press of a courier or the apologetic buzz of a client. This was a long, deliberate ring. Someone who knew the sound well enough to draw it out like punctuation. I answered. Standing on the front stoop was Dr. Edwin Poe. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him, his eyes sunken, his collar uneven, and his left hand clutching a battered leather briefcase like it held his last ounce of control. He didn't wait for an invitation. I need to see Wolfe, he said. I stepped aside. Come in, you've got the look of someone who brought both news and regret. He didn't smile. Wolfe was in the office naturally, seated in his throne of thought and silence. He didn't look up until Poe was inside and the door closed. I assume, Wolfe said dryly, you're not here to inquire about my orchids. Poe didn't sit. He stood just inside the ring of chairs and held out the briefcase. I've brought something. I don't know if it helps, but it needs to be in your hands. I took it. It wasn't locked. I laid it flat on the desk and opened it with Wolfe watching like a hawk pretending to nap. Inside were a dozen folders, cream-colored, carefully labeled. Names, dates, a few marked only with initials. What am I looking at? I asked. Copies, Poe said, from the box. I stiffened. I thought those were all recovered and sealed. They were, he said, but these weren't in the box. They were in my personal archives. They're not the same, but they're adjacent. Wolfe finally stirred. Explain. Poe exhaled. Before the annex was formalized, when it was just the four of us maintaining what we called the private trust, I kept reflections, summaries, notes on who submitted what, how they changed after. Patterns. I never shared them, they weren't incriminating in themselves. But if you match the handwriting, the dates, the confessions to the right people, it becomes clear. Clear that you were keeping a ledger, Wolfe said, unimpressed. I was monitoring risk, Poe replied. You saw what happened. When control slipped, I thought, if I had an independent record. Insurance. Yes, but I never intended to use it. Then the letters started arriving. Not just to Claire. One came to me too, but mine. Mine included something that hadn't come from the box. A page torn from one of my own reflections. He paused. Someone got into my personal files. Recently? I asked. No. It's been gone longer than I realized. Months, maybe. I thought I'd misplaced it, but now I see I was being audited long before this began. Wolfe leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Why bring this now? Because I received something else this morning. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a smaller envelope, black paper tied with a thin black ribbon. Wolfe gestured, and I took it. Inside was a single card, printed, not typed. You watched, now we watch you. No name, no logo, just the message. I turned it in my hand. The paper had weight, embossed edges, the kind used for formal invitations or old-fashioned mourning cards. This wasn't from a printer down the street, I said. Someone wanted to send a very specific tone. Yes, Poe said quietly. They wanted me to feel what it's like to be studied. Wolfe gave a long, low sound, almost a They've inverted the game, he said. I raised an eyebrow. You mean now they're targeting the observers? Indeed. They are no longer after secrets. They are after the systems that manage them. That would include you, I said to Poe. And Wolfe, he added. No, Wolfe said, I am not part of their structure. I remain external. But they tried to enter your house. They stole your matchstick holder. To rattle me, Wolfe said, not recruit me. I looked at Poe. So what do you want from Wolfe now? Poe's shoulders slumped for the first time. Advice. That got a small flicker of Wolfe's eyebrow. You don't want protection? No, I want to know if I should burn it all, walk away, leave New York, start over. Wolfe closed his eyes. No, he said. That is precisely what they want. They want to see who retreats, who caves, who resigns their role. Poe looked stricken. Then what? You do nothing. Nothing? You hold your posture, like a chess player who knows the game is no longer about the current board, but about who chooses to look away first. Poe stood there for a long moment. Then he nodded once. He took back the black envelope, left the briefcase, and exited without a word. We listened to the front door click closed. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and folded his hands across his stomach. They'll escalate now, he said. They have no choice. Why? Because we have refused their terms, and people who orchestrate chaos dislike being ignored. He looked at me. You'll keep the briefcase, study the notes, map the patterns, cross-reference handwriting samples from the case file. We are no longer investigating a theft, Mr. Goodwin. We are tracking a campaign. I nodded. And what if we don't like what we find? He allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Then we shall continue, until they reveal their purpose, or until they lose interest. Either way, we endure. That was Nero Wolfe for you. He didn't flinch, he didn't chase. He waited until the air shifted, then moved with certainty. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Inside, the matchstick holder gleamed once more beside the folder marked Rosewood, and beneath it, a new label waited. In my handwriting, clean and centered, Secondary Materials, Poe Archive. The game had changed, but Wolfe was still seated, and I was still at his side. The match continued.